On a cold December night in 1991, four teenage girls gathered at a small strip mall yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. It should have been an ordinary Friday evening, filled with chatter, laughter, and the comfort of friendship. But before sunrise, the shop would be nothing more than smoldering ash, the girls' lives brutally stolen in one of the most haunting crimes the city had ever seen. For lives ended, a community shattered, and a mystery that would linger for decades. Before we dive into this chilling case, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and stay with us until the end, because the details you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice. The year was 1991. Austin wasn't yet the bustling tech hub it would later become. Back then, it still carried the quiet charm of a college town, mixed with the slower rhythm of Texas life. Families trusted their neighborhoods. Teenagers hung out freely, without the constant fear that something terrible could happen. But that illusion of safety would be shattered in an instant. On December 6th, a Friday evening, 13-year-old Jennifer Harbison, her 15-year-old sister Sarah, and her friend 17-year-old Eliza Thomas made plans for a typical night. Eliza and Jennifer were employees at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop, located in a small strip mall in North Austin. They had a closing shift that night, and Sarah, along with her best friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, decided to hang out there while the two older girls worked. It was supposed to be harmless, just girls spending time together, helping out, talking about boys' school and the weekend ahead. No one knew that danger was lurking in the shadows. By 11 p.m., customers noticed the lights on inside the yogurt shop. A few people remembered seeing the girls laughing and cleaning up as they prepared to close. Around midnight, a patrol officer noticed the shop seemed unusually dark for that time, but didn't stop to check. Within hours, flames would engulf the building. When firefighters arrived just before dawn, they were confronted with a blaze so fierce that it seemed suspicious from the start. But what they found when the smoke cleared would haunt them forever. Inside, they discovered the charred remains of all four girls, bound, murdered, left behind in a fire set to destroy the evidence. The brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. For innocent teenagers, executed in a place meant for community and joy. Austin had never seen anything like it. And yet, despite the horror, answers didn't come quickly. The investigation would spiral into one of the most controversial, mishandled, and debated cases in Texas history. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Stories like this, stories that linger in the shadows, are the ones we bring to light. The murders of Sarah and Jennifer Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers weren't just a tragedy. They became a wound on Austin's identity. Every parent in the city felt a chill. If this could happen here, to these girls, it could happen to anyone, but who could commit such a brutal act? Who had the motive, the cruelty, and the nerve to walk into a yogurt shop, overpower for young girls, and set the entire place ablaze? Investigators worked day and night, chasing leads. But what began as a desperate search for justice soon unraveled into decades of false confessions, overturned convictions, and a cold case that refused to stay buried. This is a story of the yogurt shop murders, a case that still echoes with unanswered questions, a case that shows how fragile justice can be, and a case that, even after 30 years, continues to haunt the city of Austin. The early morning hours of December 7, 1991, were bitterly cold in Austin. Around midnight, drivers along West Anderson Lane noticed smoke rising from the small strip mall where the yogurt shop stood. At first, it didn't seem alarming. A fire in a restaurant could have been a kitchen accident. But within minutes, the flames spread faster than anyone expected, consuming the small store with a hunger that seemed unnatural. Firefighters were dispatched just before dawn. They arrived to find the shop engulfed in heavy smoke and roaring flames. The heat was so intense that windows had shattered outward, glass glittering across the sidewalk. As crews rushed to put out the blaze, they prepared themselves for what they might find inside. At first, they assumed no one would be there. After all, it was the middle of the night. The shop should have been long closed. But then, as the fire was beaten back and the smoke thinned, shadows emerged inside the scorched shop. At first glance, firefighters thought they were mannequins. Bodies too still, too twisted, too darkened by the flames to seem real. But as they moved closer, the horrifying truth revealed itself. There were 4 victims, 4 young girls, their remains blackened by the fire, their final moments frozen in haunting positions. Even the most seasoned firefighters stepped back in shock. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the hiss of steam and the crackle of charred wood. Among the responders was Captain James Key, who later admitted the scene would stay with him for life. The smell, the sight, the realization that these were not random adults but children who had been brutally murdered before being set on fire. The police were called immediately. Detectives entered the scene cautiously, realizing right away this was no ordinary fire. It wasn't just arson. It was homicide. And not just homicide. It was a massacre. When the medical examiner's team arrived, the true scope of the horror began to emerge. The girls had been bound, their clothing partially removed. Evidence suggested they had been sexually assaulted, and each of them had been shot. The killers hadn't just murdered. They had executed. What shocked investigators most was that the killers had clearly tried to erase their crime by setting the fire. The gasoline used to ignite the blaze had poured across the floor, leaving burn patterns that told a chilling story. This was deliberate, planned, and cold. The victims were quickly identified. The oldest, 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, was a bright student with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Jennifer Harbison, 17 as well, was known for her kindness and her bond with her younger sister. That sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, was described as shy, thoughtful, and deeply close to her friends. And finally, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, the youngest, who was supposed to spend the night at Jennifer's house after they closed the shop. For young lives, gone in an instant. For families, shattered forever. News of the murder spread like wildfire through Austin the next morning. Parents clutched their children tighter. Teens who once roamed freely were suddenly told not to go anywhere alone. The city felt gripped by an invisible hand of fear. Who could do such a thing? And why? Detectives began piecing together the timeline. Witnesses remembered seeing 2 men inside the yogurt shop close to closing time. One customer later recalled feeling uneasy about them, as if something wasn't right. Another detail surfaced. A police officer driving past shortly after midnight had noticed the shop dark, doors locked, everything seemingly normal, which meant the killers likely struck quickly, sometime between closing and the fire erupting. It seemed impossible that 4 girls could have been subdued so easily. Investigators theorized at least 2 attackers were involved, maybe more. The brutality of the crime suggested people who had nothing to lose, or perhaps something even darker. Thrill killers who wanted to leave their mark. The crime scene offered few clues. Much of the physical evidence had been destroyed by fire. Shell casings were recovered, but no weapon. Traces of accelerant pointed to gasoline. The bindings, charred beyond recognition, hinted at the girls' final helplessness. Before we go deeper, don't forget to hit the like button if you're still watching. Stories like this deserve to be remembered, and your support helps keep these cases alive. The city of Austin erupted in grief. Vigils were held. Flowers and candles lined the sidewalk outside the ruined yogurt shop. Strangers hugged each other, wept together, and demanded justice. But justice wouldn't come easily. The investigation was massive. Dozens of detectives were assigned. Tips flooded in. Suspects were questioned. But from the beginning, the case seemed cursed. Leads went nowhere. Alibis checked out. And as weeks turned into months, frustration grew. This wasn't just a local crime anymore. The brutality captured national attention. The FBI was called in to assist. Forensic experts combed every scrap of evidence left from the fire. Still, no clear answers emerged. Austin Police Chief Jim Everett at the time promised the families that no stone would be left unturned. But behind closed doors, detectives whispered about how little they had. For victims, one horrific night, and almost nothing solid to point them to the killers. It was the start of a nightmare investigation, one that would drag on for decades. In the first days after murders, Austin police threw everything they had at the case. Detectives were pulled from other divisions, and a task force was quickly formed. The community wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. Hundreds of tips poured in. Some came from people who thought they'd seen suspicious figures near the yogurt shop that night. Others came from psychics, self-proclaimed experts who claimed they could sense what had happened. The police checked everything, but most leads turned to dust. One of the earliest theories was that the crime might have been a robbery gone wrong. Cash was missing from the register. The idea that someone had come in to steal money, panicked, and killed the girls seemed possible. But investigators soon realized the brutality went far beyond robbery. The fire, the bindings, the sexual assaults. This wasn't a simple theft. It was deliberate, sadistic, and planned. Detectives began building lists of potential suspects. They looked into recently released offenders in the Austin area. They questioned local troublemakers, drifters, and anyone known for violence. Yet, none of them matched what investigators thought they were dealing with. What troubled the detectives most was a lack of physical evidence. The fire had destroyed almost everything. Forensic science in 1991 wasn't nearly as advanced as it is today. DNA existed, but testing was limited, expensive, and slow. What little was collected often came back inconclusive. The families of the victims were living a nightmare. Jennifer and Sarah Harbison's parents were suddenly faced with the loss of both their daughters. Amy Ayers' parents were devastated, struggling to understand how their youngest child could have been caught in something so monstrous. Eliza Thomas's family, too, was left reeling, tried to mourn while police cars and reporters lined their street. The funerals were heartbreaking. For young girls, all laid to rest within days of each other. Austin wept alongside the families, but grief quickly turned to anger. Why weren't there any arrests? Why weren't the killers caught? Before we move forward, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. These cases are long, painful, and often unresolved. But by keeping them alive, we keep pressure on the truth. Weeks turned into months. Still no arrests. Police began chasing more unconventional leads. Some investigators thought the killers might have been part of gang initiation, committing murder to prove loyalty. Others speculated about satanic ritual abuse, an idea that swept across America during the so-called satanic panic of the late 80s and early 90s. Newspapers even hinted at the possibility, fueling fear and suspicion. But again, no real evidence backed these theories. Then came the suspects. In 1992, detectives arrested a man named Maurice Pierce, a 16-year-old who had been spotted with a gun similar to the one used in the murders. He claimed he had loaned the weapon to a friend, Forrest Wellborn. Pierce and Wellborn were questioned extensively. Both denied involvement, but detectives kept circling back to them. The young men seemed suspicious, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge them. In the years that followed, police arrested and released several suspects, each time raising the family's hopes, only for those hopes to be crushed when the evidence fell apart. Witnesses changed their stories. Polygraphs were inconclusive, and with every failure, the case seemed to slip further away. Austin grew restless. The yogurt shop murders were unlike anything the city had ever seen. Parents were terrified to let their kids out at night. Rumors spread in schools, neighborhoods, and workplaces. Everyone seemed to have a theory about who had done it. Everyone wanted the nightmare to end. But behind the scenes, detectives were divided. Some believed the killers were local teens. Others thought it was the work of strangers passing through. A few wondered if they were chasing ghosts, with the real culprits already long gone. By the mid-1990s, the case had gone cold. Files gathered dust. Families begged for updates, but detectives often had nothing new to share. The pain never went away. Birthdays, graduations, and weddings passed without the 4 girls who should have been there. Yet the case refused to die. Every so often, a new tip would spark interest. A new suspect would surface. And each time, the city's hopes would rise again. Before we continue, if you're still with us, hit the like button. It really helps more people discover these haunting stories and keeps the memory of the victims alive. In 1999, 8 years after murders, police finally thought they had their breakthrough. A group of young men, including Maurice Pierce once again, were brought in. This time, some of them gave confessions. It seemed like the case was finally solved. But what followed would plunge the investigation into even deeper controversy and the families into even greater heartbreak. By the end of the 1990s, Austin police were under tremendous pressure. Nearly a decade had passed since the yogurt shop murders, and the case was no closer to being solved. The families were exhausted, the community still haunted, and detectives desperate for answers. Then, in 1999, a familiar name resurfaced: Maurice Pierce. Pierce had first been questioned back in 1992, when he was found carrying a gun similar to the one used in the murders. At the time, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, and he was released. But years later, detectives brought him back into the spotlight, along with three of his friends, Forrest Wellborn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. Pierce became the center of the investigation once again. What happened next remains one of the most controversial chapters in Austin's criminal history. After hours of interrogation, Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen confessed the murders. They gave details about the crime that investigators believed only the killers could know. To the police, it seemed like a breakthrough. After years of dead ends, they finally had confessions. But not everyone was convinced. Defense attorneys and later outside experts argued that the confessions were a result of coercion. The interrogations had stretched for hours, with detectives applying pressure, suggesting scenarios, and refusing to accept denials. Critics said the young man had simply broken down, telling investigators what they wanted to hear. Still, prosecutors pushed forward. In 2001, Robert Springsteen was tried for the murders of the four girls. The trial was emotional, with jurors forced to sit through graphic testimony about the crime. The prosecution leaned heavily on his confession. Even though physical evidence tying him to the scene was weak, he was convicted and sentenced to death. Shortly after, Michael Scott was tried and convicted as well. He received a life sentence. For the families of the victims, the verdicts were bittersweet. On one hand, there was relief. Finally, someone was being held accountable. But deep down, many felt uneasy. The confessions didn't line up perfectly with the known facts, and nagging questions remained. Before we go further, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. These haunting cases are full of twists, and every detail matters. Years passed, but the controversy only grew. Appeals were filed. Experts dissected the confessions, pointing out inconsistencies. One glaring issue stood out. There was no DNA evidence linking Scott or Springsteen to the crime scene. The forensic science of the 1990s wasn't strong enough to make a definitive connection, but as technology improved in the 2000s, the truth became harder to ignore. In 2006, DNA testing on evidence from the crime scene revealed profiles that did not match any of the four convicted suspects. In fact, it didn't match any of the men police had ever accused. This was a bombshell. If the DNA didn't belong to Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, or Wellborn, then who did it belong to? The answer was devastating. It meant the wrong men might have been sitting in prison for a crime they didn't commit. And worse, the real killers could still be out there. In 2009, the convictions of both Springsteen and Scott were overturned. The courts ruled that their constitutional rights had been violated during trial. Without solid DNA evidence, prosecutors had no choice but to release them. After spending years behind bars, they walked free. But free didn't mean innocent in the eyes of the public. The stigma of the case followed them, even though the evidence pointed elsewhere. For the victims' families, it was another crushing blow. They had been told the killers were caught. Now, suddenly, the case was back at square one. If you're still watching, hit the like button. It helps us bring more of these cold, haunting stories to light. The release of Springsteen and Scott left Austin reeling. How could such a high-profile case collapse so dramatically? How could the justice system fail twice? First by not solving the murders, then by possibly convicting the wrong men. The yogurt shop murders were once again a cold case, and the mystery seemed more tangled than ever. But the story didn't end there. In fact, the advances in DNA technology would soon open new doors and new theories that would shake the case to its core. When Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott walked out of prison in 2009, they had already lost years of their lives to a case that had branded them as murderers. Their families celebrated, but the victory felt hollow. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. The world wanted answers, and the biggest question hung heavy in the air. If not them, then who? The answer, investigators hoped, lay in DNA. In the early 1990s, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Labs could only process limited samples, and results were often inconclusive. But by the 2000s, technology had advanced enough to re-examine old evidence with far greater precision. That meant the remains of clothing, bindings, and other fragments salvaged from a fire could be tested again. What they found was shocking. Several DNA profiles recovered from the crime scene did not match Springsteen, Scott, Pierce, or Wellborn. In fact, they didn't match any known suspect. To investigators, it was like a ghost leaving fingerprints in blood. A silent witness who had been there, committed the acts, and vanished without a trace. Even more unsettling, the DNA was from an unknown male. Whoever he was, he had been close to the girls in their final moments. And yet, his identity remained a mystery. This revelation didn't just undermine convictions. It blew them apart. The prosecutors could no longer argue that the confessions were reliable when the science said otherwise. The girls had been bound, assaulted, and murdered. Someone had left their genetic footprint behind. And it wasn't the men sitting in prison. Before we go further, make sure you hit the subscribe button. These cold cases are full of turns, and the DNA breakthrough here changes everything. The families were devastated all over again. They had endured nearly 2 decades of uncertainty, only to be told their daughter's killers might still be walking free. To them, it felt like the nightmare had restarted. Austin, too, was in disbelief. The yogurt shop murders had defined an era of fear for the city. Now, instead of closure, the case had reopened into an even darker mystery. Detectives doubled down on the DNA. They ran it through CODIS, the National DNA Database. Hoping for a hit, they checked it against suspects from across Texas and beyond. Each time, the results came back the same: no match. This led to new theories. Some investigators believed the killers might have been drifters or transient criminals, men who had come through Austin and left without a trace. Others suggested a more chilling possibility, that the perpetrators were still in the city, blending in, never once caught for another serious crime. The uncertainty tore at the families. They had lived through false confessions, controversial trials, and overturned convictions. Now they had to face the possibility that justice might never come. Amy Ayers' mother once said in an interview that every knock on the door, every phone call, made her heart stop because she thought maybe, just maybe, it would be the news she had been waiting for, that someone had finally been caught. But the call never came. By 2010, the case was once again cold. Leads went nowhere. The DNA remained unmatched. And the yogurt shop murder began to settle into legend. A chilling story whispered across Austin. A wound the city cannot heal. If you're still watching, hit the like button. It helps us keep these haunting cases alive, because the victims deserve to be remembered. For the police, the case remained open. Detectives retired, and new ones took their place, each inheriting the same stack of files, the same photographs, the same questions. Each time they hoped new eyes would bring new answers. Each time, the case resisted. But technology was still advancing. And as the years stretched into decades, the hope remained that DNA could someday do what human witnesses and confessions had failed to do: reveal the truth. The problem was, science could only go so far without a name, without someone to compare the DNA to. It remained just a code, a ghost on paper. By the mid-2010s, forensic genealogy, using DNA to build family trees and trace relatives, was beginning to revolutionize cold cases across the country. Killers thought to be untouchable were suddenly being unmasked. The Golden State Killer, countless others. Families found answers after decades of silence. For Austin, the hope was that one day the yogurt shop murders would be next. But that day has not yet come. The DNA still sits in evidence files, waiting for the right match, the right technology, the right moment. And until then, the question remains: who killed Sarah and Jennifer Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers? The yogurt shop murders didn't just devastate 4 families. They left an open wound in the city of Austin. What once felt like a safe, quiet college town suddenly seemed dark, unpredictable, and dangerous. For parents, the illusion of safety was shattered. The idea that teenagers could work a late-night job or hang out with friends without fear suddenly felt impossible. In the weeks after the murders, restaurants around the city changed their closing routines. Owners required at least 2 adults to be present during closing shifts. Some businesses began locking their doors earlier. Parents insisted on picking up their kids rather than letting them walk or ride bikes at night. The city had been changed forever. For the families of Sarah and Jennifer Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, life would never return to normal. Every birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary that night was another reminder of what had been stolen. The Harbison family, who lost both daughters, carried a grief so heavy that neighbors said you could feel it simply walking past their home. Their parents were thrust into the unimaginable, burying not one, but both of their teenage children. For Amy Ayers' family, the pain was equally unbearable. Amy was just 13 years old, the youngest victim. She had her whole life ahead of her, but it was cut short in a way too cruel to comprehend. Her mother often spoke publicly about the need for justice, her voice breaking with the weight of years of waiting. And for Eliza Thomas's loved ones, the loss of a bright, driven 17-year-old who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian was a wound that never healed. The media attention was relentless. For years, local papers and national outlets returned to the story on every anniversary, every new development, every failed prosecution. Headlines screamed of America's worst unsolved murder. Documentaries were made. True crime shows dissected the case. For the families, this constant coverage was both a blessing and a curse. It kept the memory of the girls alive, but also meant their pain was endlessly revisited. Before we go further, don't forget to hit the like button if you're still with us. These are the cases that must never fade into silence, and your support helps keep them alive. The frustration grew not just for the families, but for the city itself. Austin prided itself on community, on safety, on being a place people want to call home. But the yogurt shop murders became a shadow that hovered over everything. Parents who had once felt comfortable letting their children explore freely now watched them with anxious eyes. Teenagers whispered the story late at night, each version more terrifying than the last. Detectives who worked the case carried it with them for the rest of their lives. Many admitted the horror of that scene. The burned remains of 4 innocent girls was something they could never erase from memory. Retired officers still talk about the case with a heaviness in their voices, as if the weight of failure never lifted. By the 2010s, the yogurt shop murders were no longer just a case file. They had become folklore in Austin, a dark story parents told their children as a warning, a tragedy that shaped an entire generation's sense of safety. And yet, despite the years, despite the advances in technology, the case refused to be solved. Every new detective assigned to it walked into the same labyrinth. Incomplete evidence, contradictory testimonies, and DNA that refused to give up its secret. If you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed. Cases like this are long, complex, and heartbreaking. But by following them, you help ensure that the victims are never forgotten. For the families, hope became both a comfort and a torment. Each time new technology emerged, they prayed it would be the breakthrough. Each time investigators announced they were re-examining the evidence, they braced for the possibility of closure. But each time, disappointment returned. Some family members passed away before ever learning the truth. Others continue to fight, determined that even if justice comes decades late, it must come. The city of Austin has changed dramatically since 1991. Skyscrapers now tower where small shops once stood. Tech companies have poured in, reshaping the city's culture. But no matter how much Austin grows, the yogurt shop murders remain part of its identity, a scar that never fades. For new generations, the story is a haunting introduction to the idea that evil can strike anywhere at any time without warning. For older generations, it is a painful reminder of a night that stole the city's innocence. And for investigators, it remains unfinished business. From the very beginning, detectives believed more than one person had to be involved in the yogurt shop murders. For teenage girls healthy and strong would not have been easily subdued by a single attacker. The bindings, the sequence of events, and the fire all suggested coordination. The question was, who were they? The first major suspect was Maurice Pierce, the 16-year-old caught with a gun just months after the murders. The gun was a .22 caliber pistol, the same type used in the killings. At first glance, it seemed like a solid lead. When questioned, Pierce told police he had lent the weapon to his friend, Forrest Wellborn, on the night of the murders. Wellborn denied it. Detectives interrogated both teens for hours, but neither cracked. Their stories wavered but never fully broke. In the end, police couldn't make the charges stick. Pierce was released, though he remained a name in the case for years to come. Later, attention turned to Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, who eventually confessed after grueling interrogations. Prosecutors argue their confessions prove their guilt, but critics saw cracks from the start. The details didn't align. For example, one confessed that Amy Ayers had been shot twice, while the autopsy showed she'd been shot once and strangled. Another described events that contradicted known forensic evidence. It was as if the confessions were shaped by suggestion rather than fact. Even before their convictions were overturned, many in Austin doubted their guilt. The nagging absence of physical evidence made the case feel unstable, like a house built on sand. But if not them, then who? One theory that persisted was that the killers were strangers passing through. Austin in the early 90s sat along major highways, making a convenient stop for travelers, truckers, or drifters. Some detectives believed a group of transient criminals might have targeted the yogurt shop, seen an opportunity, and committed the crime before vanishing forever. Another theory linked the murders to gang initiation rituals. The brutality, the fire, the binding of victims. It all seemed like overkill for a robbery. Could it have been a statement? A test of loyalty? Rumors of gang involvement circulated widely, though no solid evidence ever emerged. And then there were whispers of something darker, during the height of America's satanic panic. Some speculated the murders had ritualistic elements. For victims, fire, execution-style killings. To some, it looked like a sacrifice. Detectives entertained the idea briefly, but found no physical evidence of occult activity. Still, the rumor persisted, feeding fear and speculation. What complicated everything was the DNA. The profiles recovered from the scene proved at least one unknown male had been directly involved. But the science also suggested something else. There might have been more than one unknown male. The partial profiles hinted at multiple contributors, reinforcing the theory of multiple attackers. Before we continue, if you're still watching, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps more people discover these unsolved cases and keeps the victims' stories alive. Another chilling possibility emerged. The killers may have been known to the girls. The yogurt shop was a neighborhood hangout. Regular customers stopped by often. Could the attackers have been someone the victims trusted enough to let inside after closing? Witnesses recalled seeing two men in the shop near closing time. One described them as looking out of place, though nothing about their behavior seemed overtly threatening. That lead, too, faded without results. Over the years, dozens of men were questioned. Some confessed falsely, seeking attention. Others were accused by rumors but cleared by alibis. Still, the image of those two men lingered. Whoever they were, they may have been the last to see the girls alive. One name haunted the investigation long after the initial arrests, Maurice Pierce. He continued to deny involvement, even after his friend's confessions. In 2003, Pierce was arrested again on unrelated charges. By 2010, he was dead, shot by police after stabbing an officer during a confrontation. To this day, some believe Pierce knew more than he ever revealed. Yet the DNA doesn't lie. It wasn't him. It wasn't Scott. It wasn't Springsteen. It wasn't Wellborn. So who was it? The answer may still be out there, hidden in a database waiting to be matched, buried in someone's family tree, or locked away in the memories of those who never came forward. For investigators, the theories pile up, but the evidence never fits neatly. Each possibility opens a new door, only to reveal another dead end. And for the families, each theory is another wave of torment. Was it strangers? Was it someone the girls trusted? Was it thrill killers, gang members, or a lone predator with unseen help? The questions remain. From the very beginning, detectives believed more than one person had to be involved in the yogurt shop murders. For teenage girls, healthy and strong, would not have been easily subdued by a single attacker. The bindings, the sequence of events, and the fire all suggested coordination. The question was, who were they? The first major suspect was Maurice Pierce, the 16-year-old caught with a gun just months after the murders. The gun was a .22 caliber pistol, the same type used in the killings. At first glance, it seemed like a solid lead. When questioned, Pierce told police he had lent the weapon to his friend, Forrest Wellborn, on the night of the murders. Wellborn denied it. Detectives interrogated both teens for hours, but neither cracked. Their stories wavered, but never fully broke. In the end, police couldn't make the charges stick. Pierce was released, though he would remain a name in the case for years to come. Later, attention turned to Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott, who eventually confessed after grueling interrogations. Prosecutors argued their confessions proved their guilt, but critics saw cracks from the start. The details didn't align. For example, one confessed that Amy Ayers had been shot twice, while the autopsy showed she'd been shot once and strangled. Another described events that contradicted known forensic evidence. It was as if the confessions were shaped by suggestion rather than fact. Even before their convictions were overturned, many in Austin doubted their guilt. The nagging absence of physical evidence made the case feel unstable, like a house built on sand. But if not them, then who? One theory that persisted was that the killers were strangers passing through. Austin in the early 90s sat along major highways, making it a convenient stop for travelers, truckers, or drifters. Some detectives believed a group of transient criminals might have targeted the yogurt shop, seen an opportunity, and committed the crime before vanishing forever. Another theory linked the murders to gang initiation rituals. The brutality, the fire, the binding of victims. It all seemed like overkill for a robbery. Could it have been a statement? A test of loyalty? Rumors of gang involvement circulated widely, though no solid evidence ever emerged. And then there were whispers of something darker. During the height of America's satanic panic, some speculated the murders had ritualistic elements. For victims, fire, execution-style killings. To some, it looked like a sacrifice. Detectives entertained the idea briefly, but found no physical evidence of occult activity. Still, the rumor persisted, feeding fear and speculation. What complicated everything was the DNA. The profiles recovered from the scene proved at least one unknown male had been directly involved. But the science also suggested something else. There might have been more than one unknown male. The partial profiles hinted at multiple contributors, reinforcing the theory of multiple attackers. Before we continue, if you're still watching, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps more people discover these unsolved cases and keeps the victim stories alive. Another chilling possibility emerged. The killers may have been known to the girls. The yogurt shop was a neighborhood hangout. Regular customers stopped by often. Could the attackers have been someone the victims trusted enough to let inside after closing? Witnesses recalled seeing two men in the shop near closing time. One described them as looking out of place, though nothing about their behavior seemed overtly threatening. That lead, too, faded without results. Over the years, dozens of men were questioned. Some confessed falsely, seeking attention. Others were accused by rumors, but cleared by alibis. Still, the image of those two men lingered. Whoever they were, they may have been the last to see the girls alive. One name haunted the investigation long after the initial arrests, Maurice Pierce. He continued to deny involvement, even after his friends' confessions. In 2003, Pierce was arrested again on unrelated charges. By 2010, he was dead, shot by police after stabbing an officer during a confrontation. To this day, some believe Pierce knew more than he ever revealed. Yet the DNA doesn't lie. It wasn't him. It wasn't Scott. It wasn't Springsteen. It wasn't Wellborn. So who was it? The answer may still be out there, hidden in a database waiting to be matched, buried in someone's family tree, or locked away in the memories of those who never came forward. For investigators, the theories pile up, but the evidence never fits neatly. Each possibility opens a new door, only to reveal another dead end. And for the families, each theory is another wave of torment. Was it strangers? Was it someone the girls trusted? Was it thrill killers, gang members, or a lone predator with unseen help? The questions remain. By the early 2000s, the yogurt shop murders had become a haunting symbol of both tragedy and frustration in Austin. The city had changed dramatically since 1991. Highways expanded, technology boomed, and Austin's reputation as a quirky, thriving hub grew. But behind all that progress lingered the memory of a crime that refused to be solved. Detectives knew one thing for certain. The key to breaking the case lay in the DNA. Back in 1991, DNA testing was primitive. Analysts could only run basic comparisons, requiring larger, cleaner samples. Much of what was collected in the yogurt shop was degraded by fire and time. But by the late 90s and early 2000s, technology had leapt forward. New methods allowed testing of smaller, mixed samples. In 2008, prosecutors reluctantly dropped all charges against Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. The unknown DNA profile, recovered from a sexual assault kit, ruled them out as contributors. Without that physical link, the case against them crumbled. It was both a victory and a defeat. A victory because it cleared two men who should never have been convicted in the first place. A defeat because it meant the real killer, or killers, were still out there. The families, who had once hoped for closure, were thrown back into the void of uncertainty. They had endured trials, testimony, and media scrutiny, only to be told the truth was still missing. Yet, even amid the disappointment, hope flickered. That single DNA profile became the focus of every new effort. Analysts uploaded it to CODIS, the national database of criminal DNA. For years, the system generated nothing but silence. No matches, no hits, no answers. But detectives weren't ready to give up. As the 2010s arrived, forensic science underwent another revolution: genetic genealogy. Suddenly, cold cases across the country were cracking open. The Golden State Killer was caught through this very method by building a family tree from partial DNA matches. Investigators in Austin watched closely. Could the same technique finally unmask the yogurt shop killer? The answer, for now, is complicated. The DNA sample in the case is small and fragile. There's only so much material to test. Each attempt risks consuming what's left, but the possibility remains. Detectives have confirmed they are exploring forensic genealogy, though they remain cautious about preserving evidence for the right moment. Meanwhile, other new techniques, touch DNA, advanced mixture analysis, and improved profiling, have also been considered. Each brings a promise of clarity, but the reality is that breakthroughs take time. The families of the victims, now decades older, continue to press for answers. They've lived through false arrests, overturned convictions, and countless promises that justice was just around the corner. For them, technology isn't abstract. It's their last hope to know the truth before their own time runs out. In interviews, relatives of the girls have spoken about the torment of not knowing. They wake each day with the same question they've asked since 1991. Who killed them? And yet, despite the uncertainty, there is determination. The case remains open. Detectives insist they are still working leads, still testing, still searching. They've said publicly that all it takes is one match, one breakthrough, one moment where the right name surfaces. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories like this one. The past can hide secrets, but technology is making it harder for killers to remain in the shadows. Every anniversary of the murders, vigils are held. Candles flicker in the Austin night as the victims' names are spoken aloud. Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, Amy. People who never knew them come to honor their memory, ensuring they are not forgotten. The city itself has changed around the memory of that night. The original yogurt shop was torn down years ago, replaced by a different business. For newcomers to Austin, the site looks ordinary, but for locals who remember, it remains hallowed ground. Detectives have often described the case as one that never leaves them. Some of the original investigators have retired, but others still carry the weight of those 4 young lives lost. Each new detective assigned to the cold case inherits not only the evidence, but also the responsibility of seeking justice. The investigation has traveled across states, following suspects who later proved unrelated. It has probed prisons, chasing rumors that inmates bragged about being involved. It has revisited old names, knocking on doors decades after the fact. Each time, the trail goes cold again. Still, the DNA remains a guiding light. It is proof that the killer exists, not a ghost, not a rumor, not a phantom. A real person, walking free, carrying a secret only science can unlock. And in recent years, with the success of cases once thought impossible, hope burns brighter than ever. The question is not if the DNA will eventually match someone. The question is when. The yogurt shop murders were not just another crime in Austin. They became the crime that defined an era. From the moment firefighters pulled those 4 bodies from the burned-out shop, the story spread like wildfire across Texas, then across the nation. Austin, once seen as a laid-back college town with a vibrant music scene, suddenly carried a darker reputation. Reporters descended on the city. Camera crews parked outside the yogurt shop. Headlines screamed of slaughter in Austin, and every detail of the girls' lives was dissected for the public. Parents were horrified. If 4 girls could be bound, murdered, and burned in a small yogurt shop, then no place felt safe anymore. The killing shattered the illusion that Austin was immune from the kind of violence seen in larger cities. News anchors described the scene in chilling detail. Local papers ran stories not just about the murders, but about the growing fear in neighborhoods across the city. Suddenly, fast food restaurants, corner stores, and late-night hangouts no longer felt safe. Businesses closed earlier. Teenagers who once worked late-night shifts were pulled from jobs by terrified parents. And as the years went on, the media kept the case alive. Every anniversary brought new headlines. Every trial, new coverage. When suspects were arrested, it was front-page news. When convictions were overturned, it was breaking news. The case refused to fade into the background because it was simply too haunting, too brutal, too unfinished. Courtroom drama fed the public's obsession. The confessions of Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott were replayed endlessly on television. Prosecutors framed the case as solved, while defense attorneys tore apart the weaknesses in the state's argument. The trials became spectacles, drawing national networks like Court TV and Dateline NBC. But with each twist came renewed doubt. When DNA evidence ruled out the supposed killers, media coverage shifted tone, from triumph to embarrassment. Headlines that once declared justice now questioned the entire foundation of the investigation. The public watched as the justice system seemed to collapse in real time. For the families, the media was both a blessing and a curse. Coverage kept the case in the spotlight, ensuring the girls were not forgotten, but it also meant their grief was constantly on display. Private pain became public record, and false promises of closure only reopened wounds. Austin itself changed. The yogurt shop was torn down in the late 1990s, but the lot remained a place of pilgrimage. People left flowers, candles, and notes. Strangers who never met the victims felt connected to their story, drawn by the sheer horror and tragedy of the crime. For many residents, the murders marked the end of innocence in Austin. The city's population grew rapidly in the years that followed, but older locals often spoke of life as before the yogurt shop and after the yogurt shop. Even outside of Austin, the case sparked debate. Were teenagers safe working late shifts? Did the justice system rush to convict the wrong people? Was enough being done to solve cold cases? Talk shows, newspapers, and true crime magazines debated the murders for decades, each offering theories, each keeping the story alive. The rise of the internet only magnified the frenzy. Online forums dedicated entire threads to unraveling the case. Amateur sleuths pored over court transcripts, autopsy reports, and police records. Podcasts and YouTube channels revisited the crime, spreading the story to new generations who were not even born in 1991. And with each retelling, the same haunting image reemerged. For young girls full of life, trapped in a nightmare they never deserved. Before we continue, if you're still with me, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Stories like these remind us how fragile safety can be, and how important it is to keep fighting for answers. The media pressure also kept law enforcement on edge. Detectives knew the public expected results. Every lead, every rumor was followed aggressively, sometimes too aggressively. Critics argue that this pressure contributed to the wrongful focus on Springsteen and Scott. The hunger for closure became a trap. But through it all, one fact never changed. The killer or killers were still out there. The media may have shaped the narrative, but it could not solve the mystery. That responsibility remained with investigators, families, and ultimately, the science of DNA. And so the story endured, not just as a crime, but as a legend, a wound in Austin's history that never healed. The yogurt shop murders left a scar not only on 4 families, but on an entire city. More than 3 decades later, the crime is still spoken of in whispers, still referenced in classrooms, courtrooms, and conversations about unsolved tragedies. For law enforcement, the case became a cautionary tale. Investigators admitted mistakes were made, mistakes born from desperation and pressure. The wrongful focus on certain suspects, the reliance on questionable confessions, the rush to deliver justice all revealed the dangers of tunnel vision. Today, many police departments across the country cite the case when training new detectives. It is a reminder that evidence must always come before theory, and that no amount of pressure justifies cutting corners. The families, meanwhile, have carried a different legacy, the unbearable weight of grief without closure. Parents and siblings have spoken at vigils year after year, their voices breaking but their resolve unshaken. They remind the world that Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy were not just victims of crime. They were daughters, sisters, friends. Jennifer Harbison had dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Her younger sister, Sarah, was just beginning to discover her own passions. Eliza Thomas was known for her bright spirit and kindness. Amy Ayers loved animals and had her whole life ahead of her. These were not just names in a headline. They were lives stolen too soon. Each December, the city of Austin remembers them. Candlelight vigils illuminate the night, casting shadows that feel both solemn and hopeful. At those gatherings, you can hear it in the voices of strangers and loved ones alike. The determination that this case will not be forgotten, that one day the truth will be known. The yogurt shop murders also reshaped the way the public views unsolved crimes. In the 1990s, cold cases often slipped into dusty archives. Today, with new technologies like forensic genealogy, the public believes more strongly than ever that no case is truly unsolvable. The yogurt shop case remains one of the most prominent reminders of that belief. But it is also a reminder of something darker. Killers can walk free for decades. Somewhere out there, the person or people responsible for this crime may still be alive. They may have built families of their own. They may have moved away, changed names, or blended into society. They may even live quietly in Austin, walking the same streets, living unnoticed, carrying a secret they've managed to bury from the world, but not from themselves. That possibility is what chills investigators most. The idea that justice delayed may also be justice denied. And yet, detectives remain resolute. They insist the case is active, that evidence is still being tested, and that new methods are always on the horizon. Before we continue to the final chapter, take a moment to subscribe. These stories keep the memories of victims alive, and your support helps shine a light on cases that demand answers. The yogurt shop murders changed Austin forever. They hardened the city, taught bitter lessons about justice, and left behind a story that refuses to end. The final legacy is not only one of horror, but of perseverance. The families, the investigators, the journalists, and even the strangers who never let go of the story. For as long as questions remain, the case remains alive. And as DNA technology evolves, the hope grows stronger. The killer's name may already be hidden in a database, waiting to be unlocked. One day, one click, one comparison could bring it all crashing down. Until then, the shadow remains. On December 6, 1991, 4 girls walked into a yogurt shop in Austin, Texas. They laughed, they worked, they made plans a weekend. Hours later, their lives were stolen in an act so brutal that decades later it still defies understanding. 30-plus years have passed, and yet the truth remains hidden. The fire has long been extinguished. The yogurt shop is gone. The city has grown, changed, and thrived. But for the families, the clock never moved forward. They're still frozen in that December night, waiting for a phone call, waiting for justice, waiting for something more than silence. The suspects once paraded as killers have been cleared. The DNA that should have solved everything has only deepened the mystery. The confessions once seen as breakthroughs are now viewed as mistakes. And the shadow of uncertainty continues to hang over Austin. Some believe the killers were strangers passing through, ghosts of the highway who disappeared into the dark. Others believe the answers lie closer to home, in familiar faces, in secrets kept by people who still walk among us. What is certain is this: someone knows the truth. Somewhere, there's a person who remembers exactly what happened inside that yogurt shop. A person who knows how the girls were bound, who pulled the trigger, who struck the match. That person has carried the weight of silence for over 30 years. But time has a way of catching up. Every year, DNA technology sharpens. Every year, new techniques emerge. Every year, the walls close in a little tighter. The killer may have escaped justice for now, but the evidence remains. Silent, waiting, unforgiving. For the families, hope has never died. They continue to believe that one day, the name will be spoken, the face will be revealed, and the long nightmare will finally end. Until then, the yogurt shop murders remain one of America's most haunting unsolved crimes, a story of innocence lost, justice denied, and questions that echo through time. And as you hear this story, remember the names of those who were taken: Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, Amy Ayers, for young lives, for futures stolen, for families broken. Their story is not over, and neither is the search for the truth. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others. Because keeping these stories alive is how we bring light to the darkest mysteries. One day, the answers may come. Until then, the shadow of the yogurt shop murders remains, chilling, unresolved, and unforgettable.